Have you ever thought about why you come to church? Some of you have been coming to this church or to church for a long, long time. And why? Why do you come to church? Is it so that you can grow closer to God? Is it so that you can become a better person? Do you come to church so that you can hear really great music? Give it up for that music again. Or hopefully you'll hear a halfway decent sermon. Do you come to church because you're hoping to build a strong spiritual foundation for your children and for your family? Or do you simply come to church for the coffee and donuts? Now, some of you cannot believe I just took a bite. I'm chewing and swallowing, forgive me, a donut. Whatever it takes to connect with you all.
It's a line item in the budget.
Amen. Nancy said it's a line item in the budget. I can just feel that sugar, Melinda, coagulating in my arteries. What I've learned over the years, though, maybe it's a United Methodist thing, but in this local church, you might say that the combination of coffee and a donut equals the third sacrament of our church. And for all you literalists out there, I'm just metaphorically speaking here. What is it about that? Excuse me, my hands are sticky. What is it about that coffee that we serve in the church, you know? I mean, I'm sort of a coffee snob, but every Sunday morning, I'm drawn to that coffee. Is it the coffee or is it the communion? Makes me think of a story about that Tom Long tells, and Tom Long is a preacher's preacher. He teaches homiletics, which means preaching. He taught for many years at Candler Theological Seminary. And he tells a story about a young man who accused his father of being a hypocrite. And the young man said to his dad, "Dad, you are such a hypocrite. You go to church every single week, but you're agnostic." And the father explained, "Well, there are many reasons to go to church, son." He said, "For example, my friend George goes to church so that he can talk to God. And me," the dad said, "well, I go to church so that I can talk to George." And which matters more? Communing with God or communing with George, aka other people? Both, says Jesus. Both matter because loving God and loving people are inseparable. And that's the takeaway for the day. My sermon thesis, if you look in the bulletin, you can reflect on that later. It's written there for you. Loving God and loving people are one and the same. They are inseparable. You cannot love God and not love others, and you cannot love others and not love God. They are one and the same. So some religious leaders, experts in the law, they knew their Bible backwards and forwards. They were in the church every time the door opened. They had their doctrine fixed tight, and they want to know. They're trying to trap Jesus. You might say they're pushing him against the wall, and they say to him, "Which one of all the commandments in Judaism is the greatest?" Now, we know that there were 613 of those, but I have read, preparing for today, that there were, by that time in history, probably over 800 commandments. And they want to know from Jesus which one is the greatest. And Jesus doesn't flinch. He says it just right off the bat. It just rolls off his tongue. He summarizes the entire Bible here. And he says that all the laws and the prophets too hang on these commandments. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And it is so simple. And it is also so hard. And yet, like most of us, if we're honest with ourselves, we go around believing that we're pretty mature, that we're large-hearted, and we do a pretty decent job of loving our neighbor as ourselves. But I was reading this week, from a psychological point of view, most human beings, overestimate ourselves. We do. We think we're doing better than we really are. And a great study, is pretty famous, you're probably familiar with it, has to do with driving in the United States. Studies have proven that over 70% of drivers in the United States believe that we are above average drivers. And not to pick on my brothers here, but if you're a male, it's even a higher percentage. We tend to overestimate ourselves and think we're doing better than we really are. If we're so good at loving others as ourselves, then why is it in a church meeting where the stakes are high, emotions are high, why do we become so defensive and judgmental and so easily triggered? I love this quote. You probably don't hate anyone, but you can be paralyzed by daily negatives, many prejudices, and knee-jerk judgments that can produce a mood of undeclared war. Across barbed wire fences, invisible bullets fly. Loving our neighbors as ourselves is such an uphill climb, and if we're not careful, if we're not paying attention and self-aware, we can get stuck and we can remain stagnant in our spiritual growth. And so when it comes to Christian discipleship, we have to be extra intentional. We need a plan. Think about all the money, time, efforts, resources that we spend becoming more and more competent in our studies, in our career, in our financial planning and investments, in our interests and other hobbies. And that's good. We should spend our time on these things, but should we not spend just as much time, maybe more, on how we relate to God and others? We need a plan. So here at First United Methodist Church of Gulfport, we have a plan. We already had discipleship opportunities in place. But this past January, we launched some brand new curriculum that is called Emotionally Healthy Discipleship. All right, it's called Emotionally Healthy Discipleship. And this was created in a Pentecostal church by Peter Scazzaro and his wife, Jerry. And over 20 years ago, they moved to Queens, New York, and they started this church plant. It's a multi-ethnic church, and it's had its highs and lows, just like any other congregation. It has been, according to Jerry, a roller coaster ride. And Peter became a workaholic. He was always at the church and burning the candle at both ends. And Jerry, his wife, one day had enough. And she said to him, I love you, but I would rather be alone than be married to you. And then she said, furthermore, I quit this church because nobody should follow your leadership. And this caused Peter Scazzaro to hit rock bottom. And so as a couple, they began to slow down, take inventory, and they went to counseling. Therapeutic counseling, and they began to learn things from their family of origin that they had to unlearn so that their marriage would be healthier, and then they began to incorporate what they were learning in the discipleship practices of their church, and this has all led to this curriculum that we are using in our church, and their premise is this: it is not possible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. You see, what happens is we keep up appearances on the outside. We're all guilty of this. We look like we've got our acts together, but inside we're like a tree that's The bark is fine, but it's rotting on the inside. Our external seems fine, but the interior is withering away. And Jesus says it this way: woe to you, you hypocrites, you whitewashed tombs. An emotionally healthy discipleship has an antidote. It's not the end-all be-all, but it's one tool to help with this dynamic. Now, this curriculum is a 2-part series consisting of 2 courses. There's emotionally healthy spirituality, and that's 8 weeks long, and it meets for 2 hours every session. And then there's part 2 is emotionally healthy relationships, another 8-week course, 2 hours at a time. Now, in this church, back in January, we started these emotionally healthy spirituality courses, and we have led 3 of these courses, and at least 100 of you have participated, some of you more than once or twice, in emotionally healthy spirituality. Can I invite us? This is a little bit risky, but if you just participated in 1 class of emotionally healthy spirituality, maybe you had to drop out for some reason, but would you just stand? Let's give these people a hand. Thank you for participating in many ways. So next, after Labor Day, starting on Wednesday nights, we're going to do it on Wednesday, from 5:30 to 7:30, childcare provided upon request. We're going to offer for the first time the second part of this course called Emotionally Healthy Relationships. And people have asked me, well, if I haven't taken the first course, EHS, spirituality, can I take EHR on relationships? And the answer is yes. We'll take you whenever you're willing to give time to God and others, we'll take you. So just go ahead and sign up. And I want to remind you that these courses are not designed to take it once, check it off the list, I'm done. We're supposed to take these over and over. The idea is in 7 years' time, this will be so much a part of the fabric of who we are. It will define us as a culture. And so if you're a leader in this church or you're committed to our congregation being healthy and mature, then the idea is that you'll take one of these courses every single year. But let's look at this emotionally healthy relationships course. But first, check this out. Do we have the slide of the cross? The symbol of our faith is the cross. This represents the saving work of Jesus Christ. And so, emotionally healthy spirituality focuses on our vertical relationship with God. Of course, God is more than in the heavens. God is transcendent, but up symbolizes that. So we work on our relationship with God in the first course. In the second course is our horizontal relationships. We're working on our relationships with others. Now, which one do you think is harder and more challenging? The second course. This is where the rubber meets the road because, loving God is easy because God loves you back and forgives you over and over and over and is full of grace. But what happens when we have to love our enemies or love those people who annoy us? Or those people that we haven't talked to in a long, long time and have no plan on doing so. So this is really challenging, and it's vulnerable, and it's really harder to grasp. I've taken both, and this one's by far a little bit trickier, and it's because what they do in this course is they provide us with some practical skills. Now, they're not end-all, be-all skills. They're just training wheels to get you on a path towards healthier relationships. But let me just share a few of those skills. How to stop mind reading. Any mind readers in the room? Yeah, thanks for being honest. Another session works with how to listen more respectfully, deeply, and charitably. And the third one is how to fight cleanly. We're not going to learn these things on our own or on autopilot. And you can listen to millions of sermons that will inspire you. They will talk about how to love God and neighbor. But it's a whole nother ballgame when you're learning practical skills that promote self-awareness and shadow sides. And they force you to carry these skills into your families, your relationships, your workplaces, and beyond. You know, we live in a highly individualistic society. We are really focused on our individual rights. And I don't want to be disparaging here, but you hear people all the time in this individualistic kind of world say, I'm spiritual, but I am not religious. Well, no wonder. Religion means religament, coming back together, and community is messy, is challenging, and it holds us accountable. But you see, the one gift that we have to give here at First United Methodist Church of Gulfport, we have many gifts to give, but the greatest gift, I believe, is the gift of Christian community, whereby we are centering our lives, our very mission, the optimal goal, meaning what we hope by God's grace to accomplish, is to love God and neighbor. It's all about community. Left to our own devices, we will not and cannot mature in God's grace. It's about communing with God and each other. And I've seen it happen. The most precious gift that I've witnessed in this emotionally healthy discipleship course that we've been doing in our church, the most precious gift of all is how it brings us together around tables. And in genuine vulnerability, we share the highs and lows of our everyday lives. And around those tables, it does not matter how much money you have. It does not matter how many degrees you have or have not earned. And it does not matter one's reputation or status in the community. All that matters around those tables is that we're all the same, broken and in desperate need of God's redeeming grace. I want to close with a story. When I was a little girl, I so very much wanted, one Christmas, a rock tumbler. You remember the toy from the 1980s? I really wanted one. They were all the rage that year. I don't know why. It seemed like all my friends at school wanted a rock tumbler. Even my sister, who is 2 years my senior, we're close in age, even she wanted a rock tumbler. And so we had an idea. Boy, if we could collaborate, if we could show our parents that we both wanted a rock tumbler and that we would share it, I bet we'll get a rock tumbler for Christmas. So we waited, as most children do, in great anticipation, and then that morning, that Christmas morning came, and we ran to the living room, we looked under that tree, and there it was, the rock tumbler. We were so excited that we took it out of the box, we ran outside because our parents insisted, and it's a pretty noisy toy. And we went to the carport and we plugged it into an electric outlet because if you don't know about these rock tumblers, they require electricity because there's a motor and then it turns a barrel or this, I guess it's a drum. It causes it to rotate over and over and over. And so what you do is you take some rough rocks, they have rough edges and sand and grit on them, and you put them in the drum. And then you put more sand, and then you put more gravel, and then you pour some water in there. And then you close the drum, you attach it to the motor, and then you let it turn. Tumble and tumble and tumble. And it goes on and on and on. And as it turns out, I must confess to you, that morning I spent probably 30 minutes, probably around 15. I'm probably overestimating how long I spent with that toy because I soon lost interest. I did not, at the time, have the patience for it. Because as it turns out, it takes a rock tumbler not just hours, not just days, but weeks, sometimes as many as 4 weeks to work its magic. Just over a year ago, I was visiting a friend of mine. He's here today. He's sitting in the back, active in this church. He's here almost every Sunday. Tom Baker, can you raise your hand? He's wearing the bolo tie. his beloved Nell had a fall all off her porch. It was an accident. And she died suddenly, and it was a hot day, and I called Tom, and he lives way out in the country. I said, do you mind if I come over and visit with you? And he said, I'd love for you to come. So I went there, and boy, he wanted to show me every inch and corner of his homestead, or their homestead. You remember, you took me to see every tree, Tom, every bush. You wanted me to go inside the house and see the sewing room where Nell made all those countless square dance dresses. And then we went into your workshop. And I discovered things about Tom I had never known. What a remarkable artist and how talented you are, Tom. He's made sets for years for Mardi Gras functions and many, many other events. But what I also learned about Tom is that he's an artist in his own right, in that he's and maybe I'm pronouncing this wrong, a lapidarist. Do you know what that is? It's someone who shapes stones into precious gems and jewelry. And when I was in that workshop, Tom, you rekindled the imagination of my childhood as I looked at your beauty, the works of your hands. Church, this is how it works. This is what it's like. I know we live in a highly individualized society, but this is what happens when we commit, and not only commit, but submit ourselves to Christian community. Whether that be in our families, with our spouses and partners, with friends, co-workers, and in our congregations. If we can be patient with one another, with all that tumbling and rumbling, if we can handle the noise, the grit, and the grind over time, with the help of God and each other, all that friction and all that strain, you can imagine prayerfully what begins to happen. Our rough edges get knocked off. And what was so abrasive in each of us becomes softer. And suddenly something emerges that's more beautiful than anything we could have ever conjured. It does not, trust me, it does not happen overnight, but it does indeed happen. We grow up and we become who God calls us, who God wills us to become, and that is inseparable. Loving God and loving neighbor forever and ever and ever. So be it, and so it is. Amen.